anyone who wants to ask a question, this meeting is being live streamed. I press OK. And so let us go to the questions, because the text is not easy to understand. We are always working from beginning to the end, from end to the beginning, from the beginning to the end, with understanding of enlightened mind, from the beginning to the end with understanding of non-enlightened mind. And finally, we come to the practice, which is very simple, and we can also enlarge it with some understanding of the Chinese commentaries. Now, I'm not putting the stuff of Chinese commentaries because it would be too much. Who says explains like this? Who explains like that? So we just keep to the text, but then different traditions explain in a different way, and then we can add the early understanding, like Tiantai tradition, which is very different from the Xuanzang tradition, and the Zen tradition. So it makes it very interesting how we who have Buddha nature, we become stupid. So it's an interesting theme. And especially for people who are interested in science, so it's the materia does not exist, and what is surely there, what we can confirm as being there, is a mind, no? So the science also recently comes to similar conclusions, that how we experience ourselves and the world depends on the mind, and the different categories of beings experience the mind in a different way. So it makes it quite. Now the earliest translators, who were Christian missionaries in China, they understood this one mind as a God. So they simply translated one mind as God, and insisted that the China and the West, they have the same philosophy, same understanding, but it is much more complicated than that. So shall we go to the text, or we first approach some questions? Now
I
we
have a
have had.
question, Sư.
Yes, please come.
Sư, just want to ask when I do sitting, then usually if I come down, then it's kind of like a stream of images. And these images could be something random or could be something from my memory.
Yes.
And it flows as if I'm the third person who watch at the movie. And it can go for a while and then it disappear. And then it's nothing and suddenly appear again, new images and random things. Or even when your eyes half open, you see at the floor is could like some new images come from the floor or something. So what I want to say, ask is where these images come from when it's already disappeared. It's from our previous subconscious memory, or?
Well, this is exactly explained in the lesson we are going to learn today. Our mind, since we are not the Buddhas, is the continuity of the mind. And the continuity of the mind is the continuity of the images in the mind, which are stored in the alaya, in the store consciousness. So everybody is a different being because everybody has a different images stored in the mind. And they, when the thought arises, so it arises together with object, which is actually image of the object. And holding to the image of the object is perception. What we perceive, that we receive. What we receive, that we uh, differentiate. And we differentiate according to our previous experience, which is similar in case we have a similar education, similar culture, similar experiences, but it can be very, very different even among human beings when we are, say, educated and in a traditional way, like in India or China or especially places like Tibet or Burma, where the traditional education is still very strong. So we may have a very, very different idea about the self and about the world. And uh, our mind is a kind of a habit. And this habit is based on our previous experiences. And these previous experiences, when they become very rigid, so our mind becomes very rigid. When these previous experiences are understood with more wisdom, then our mind is more flexible. But in the Chinese tradition, I think I have explained before, there is a same, even in Indian tradition, the same object, same name for object, for image, and for arising of object, and for the and it is called nimitta in Chinese, the xiang. I sometimes translate the xiang as a aspect of mind, sometimes as image, sometimes as object, but it is the same word in Indian tradition and in Chinese tradition. So because of the xiang, the mind has a xing. Xing means a form, akara. There has to be picture in order that there is a form. And the form depends on the picture we have in the mind. So, uh, uh, according to Western way of thinking, when some picture appears in the mind, so it is uh, uh, it is not materiality. It is not the akara. It is not form. In Indian thinking, Chinese thinking, whatever has form hmm, is is connected to even when we dream, the form is also material. When we close our eyes, the form we see through our mental consciousness, it's also kind of material. And material is form, is named rupa. And rupa in Pali and Sanskrit means to be broken. That which is broken is materiality. And the image you have in mind is also always subject to being broken. And the world is from the root luch, which means to also to break. So the images of the mind are always breaking, and the world is always breaking. And without the mind, there is no breaking. This idea is very deeply anchored in Indian and Chinese philosophy, but not in Western philosophy. When I close your mind and see like someone like Lars next to me or Monica, so that image in my mind uh, is the form, and form and materiality is the same word. Hmm? And this is very, very different in Western thinking. So when I see a form with my closed eyes, it's not the same as a form I see with open eyes. But in this tradition, it is same. So the images in the dream and the images we hold in process of perception, they are also kind of like a dream. They are not fixed. But in Western philosophy, the materiality, like the table, the chairs, is something that is there outside, and it exists in its own right. But in
And
Buddhist philosophy, the chairs, the door I see, the table I see, is also just image. The true materiality is like hardness, softness, smoothness, roughness. Hmm? And these are the qualities of the objects we see. But the objects we see, they are just pictures, symbols, which are subjected to breaking. And the breaking does not appear if the mind does not appear. And mind appears when we have memory or when we have thinking. Hmm? And memory and thinking in Chinese is the same word, nian. When we think, we apply memory. Hmm? So the basic ideas are quite different in Western thinking and in Eastern thinking. So these are things which are usually not very much discussed, but they are uh, quite mm, basic concepts as far as yoga is concerned, or Buddhism is concerned, or Taoism is concerned. Hmm? So in this treatise that we are discussing, you have the true mind, which is not moving, and you have the forms that the mind creates, which are always moving. But the true mind does not move. The moving mind does not leave the true mind. So I think I have explained the last lesson in Chinese. The suchness, the tatata, is translated as Jen Ru. Jen means real, Ru means such. Hmm? Such true. Such true is the mind which moves, and also the mind which does not move. So in this tradition, the Yogacara or Vijnanavada, everything is true because everything is mind. Hmm? And from the true mind in all beings, which is called Buddha nature, or the uh, the womb of the Tathagata Garbha, evolves the consciousness. First, yesterday we have mentioned, first the alaya consciousness, the consciousness which lives in the world. From the alaya consciousness evolves the manas consciousness, which is our continuity of the mind. And from this continuity of the mind, which are the images connected with the images in our mind, develops the five consciousnesses, which accordingly to individual consciousness, manas, or to the organ of thinking, which is the same word, then develop the idea that what we see through the five senses, eyes, ears, and so on, is different from the mind, and that it is there. But this idea is not quite accepted by most of schools of Indian and Chinese philosophy. No. So the outlook is a little different. Hmm? So the alaya consciousness, which explains why we are different, hmm? in it, in this tradition, I think I have mentioned last time, the suchness is a cause, and the ignorance, avidya, which literally means no science, is the pratyaya, is a condition. So we have a cause and condition. Due to that, we have the consciousness which dwells in the world. Hmm? And from this consciousness which dwells in the world evolves individual consciousness, and from individual consciousness evolves the differentiated consciousness, which is based on the five senses. Hmm? So we have had, I will read it again. Last time we learned.
Uh, Another question, Shifu.
Yes, okay.
Is these images that make us more like, I don't know the others, but in my case, I feel that most of the time I'll deal more with the images in my mind than the images that than the things that I see real time. Then that makes me more judgmental. So we judge because we deal with the images in our mind.
Yes, the idea in the philosophy of mere consciousness is that what we see in the dream and what we see in the awakened consciousness, what we and the consciousness in deep sleep and the consciousness of enlightenment are only one consciousness. But this consciousness evolves, and it evolves from alaya, it becomes individual consciousness, which is based on continuity and which is individual. Alaya is based on the also on continuity. If we don't have continuity, we don't have, strictly speaking, a differentiating mind. So the Buddha, we have learned before, the enlightened mind is of the nature of mirror. Hmm? And when we understand it, we can accomplish uh, whatever is unthinkable with the mind. Hmm? But first, we have to understand all types of consciousness that has been explained before: the alaya consciousness, the individual consciousness, the mental consciousness, and the five consciousnesses. They function same as a mirror, but this mirror evolves from alaya consciousness. We have the individual consciousness. From individual consciousness, we have the fixation on the object and subject as being something completely different. Hmm? And this differentiation evolves in the consciousness itself, because the consciousness hmm, uh, differentiates on the base of the previous experiences which are stored in our mind. Hmm? And this storage is like a computer which then reproduces what we going to experience and going to see. Hmm? So I'm not good in computer, but I think there is something like hard disk or something like that, no? And where you store the information and it will produce then on the screen. And the screen is our mind based on the informations we put in it. So in this tradition, uh, even so, and you can check it with yourself and with others, even so we experience the same object, we turn to this object. Turning to object is attention, and also nimitta, hmm, also creating image, is different for all of us. So I see the same object, but I have the different reaction, like say Monica, and Monica different reactions than Lars, because we have stored different seeds in the consciousness. And now we have similar seeds because we have similar education, but we can have a very different seeds. Then I have been before in Peru, and had the chance to meet some the shaman people. They have a very different ideas about the world. They see the spirit under the earth, the spirit on the earth, the spirit in the sky, and everything for them is a spirit, and the spirits create different images, and these images, they control the beings. So they induce in them kind of special states of mind by drugs, and according to the images the beings produce, they then can help them to create a balanced mind. You have to balance the spirit of the under earth with the spirit of the on the earth, and with the spirit in the sky. And each spirit has its own symbols. And it makes perfect sense for them. But if I explain it to you, you may feel very perplexed. What do they mean? So it's very much so. We are programmed to see things in a certain way, and when we are already born, as a babies, when you study the babies, even so we have the same reactions because we are humans, we grasp something and so on, but the babies react in a very different way. So it means that we are born with these seeds in the mind, which then form further our reactions to ourselves and to the world. So this is very fascinating, and our psychology is still in the, so to say, in what you call it, the baby's trousers, in diapers. Our friend has now the baby, so he's familiar. The diapers. We Our psychology is still in diapers compared to what the ancients were investigating as far as mind is concerned. So only in Sanskrit you have so many different words for mind. It is amazing. And the main words now we are working with is chitta, which means alaya consciousness in this tradition, is manas, which means thinking, organ of consciousness, and the vijnana, which means differentiating, discriminating consciousness. So the alaya evolves in this tradition from Buddha nature because of the conditioning of ignorance. Because we have ignorance, we have the moving mind. And the moving mind evolves in the object and subject discrimination. And the object and subject discrimination then brings our vision of the world to completion. And in this tradition, the ignorance influences the suchness, and suchness influences the ignorance, which is not accepted in Xuanzang tradition. According to Xuanzang tradition, the manas, the individual consciousness, sees alaya as a self. And alaya is the consciousness which moves, called pravriti vijnana, which creates the individual consciousnesses and the sense consciousnesses, because it is always evolving, pravriti. But here, the alaya and the manas, they work together and they evolve from the suchness. Suchness is a base, and ignorance is a condition for movement. When we realize that this movement is illusionary and we get to the origin of the movement, to ignorance, then we are Buddhas. So these things have been discussed before, and now we have learned how the mind works due to ignorance. Now we learn in this lesson the functions of this mind which moves due to ignorance. And this mind, they are in the Lankavatara Sutra, which is a base for Zen tradition, Chan tradition. You have the three types of consciousnesses. You have the karma consciousness. You have the evolving consciousness, avarjana chitta. And you have the say the illusionary consciousness. And this comes here also. The avarjana means actually evolving. In Theravada, and I have been a student of Theravada, every mental process, no matter whether mental process or the process of the five senses, starts with avarjana. Avarjana means evolving. When we pay attention to an object, no matter whether picture in the mind, the mental consciousness, or the object outside, the visual consciousness, first there is attention. Attention is a beginning of the mental process. Due to this mental process, in Theravada, the bhavanga, the continuity of the consciousness, is interrupted. In this tradition, due to the karma consciousness, there appears the evolving consciousness. And due to evolving consciousness, we see what we see. First, everything is in the mind. Then, due to organ of thinking, this mind then develops continuity. And due to continuity, we then perceive the world. Everybody pay attention to different objects, even though we see the same object. For example, I come to Indonesia, to some remote island, then I will react in a different way from these minority people who are living on that island and who have a different idea about the world. I will see different things. I will relate to different things, because my mind has been formed in a different way. So that which creates forms in the mind, that is based on the evolving consciousness, avarjana chitta, and the avarjana chitta is based in karmic consciousness. And karmic consciousness moves the mind. So let us come to the text, or unless there are other questions, because our time is very limited. Are there any other questions? Is it getting more clear? So let us repeat where we have finished. This previous passage before what we learned about sameness and differences was explaining how the mind moves. And now we are explaining the causes and conditions of the moving mind. And we started with, I cannot find the translation, so I just translate directly from Chinese. 复次生灭因缘执，所谓众生以心以身转故，是意于何? It means, and further, this mind which arises and ceases as causes and condition, and that means that we, as sentient beings, we are based in chitta, which means generally alaya, in e, which means manas, the individualizing consciousness, and isha, which means the consciousness which then further evolves from individualizing consciousness and takes the objects and the mind as being something completely separate. And then it's how to understand it. What is the meaning of this? And he says, I alayesha, based on alaya consciousness, we explain that there is existence of ignorance, of wuming, which means literally in Chinese non-clarity. Non-clarity is ignorance. And in Sanskrit, avidya means the state of non-enlightenment, the non-science. Because we have no science, we are not enlightened. So the true science in spirituality is the science of enlightenment. So this, because of the alaya, without being clear, that means we have ignorance, then without awareness, the mind arises. Mind arises without awareness. Awareness is a synonym of wisdom, because we have ignorance. So mind arises without awareness. And because a mind arises without awareness, it has ability to see, and it has ability to reveal what is seen. This, what perceives and what is perceived, emerges together from the mind which has no awareness, which has no wisdom. So when we have karmic consciousness, so karmic consciousness is always based on the contrast. Hmm? There is the alaya consciousness. From the alaya consciousness arises movement. This movement which arises from the alaya consciousness is called the karma consciousness. When the karma consciousness, which brings the mind into motion and which is responsible for this and that, arises the idea of perceiver based on karma, and what is perceived, that is the development of the karma. Hmm? So the perceiver is based on karma, and what is perceived is the development of the karma, but they happen on the at the same time, because we have not yet left the alaya consciousness, which is a base for evolution of all other types of consciousnesses. Hmm? Now, when there is karmic consciousness, there is a perceiver and the perceived, but they still happen in the consciousness itself. But because we have no awareness, we don't see it. So, because we don't see it, we hold, grasp the object as something which is there. And when we grasp the object as something which is there, there arises qi, nian xiangxi. There arises a continuity of the thought. And this continuity of the thought, we therefore explain as being manas, as being the base for arising and cessation. And the base for arising and cessation comes from the mind itself. The real mind has no arising and the cessation. The mind which has arising and the cessation arises from the mind itself and arises as individualizing mind. As individualizing mind. And how this happens, let us again translate directly from Chinese. 是一富有无中命. This individualizing consciousness, or this manas, has 5 names, 5 kinds of names. Which 5? The author asked himself. The first is called the karma consciousness, which I have translated as activating consciousness, which is not bad. So when there is movement, immediately appears at the same time. When there is movement, when there is no movement, there is no karmic consciousness. When there is movement, there is the aspect of evolving. The aspect of evolving is the aspect here of seeing, of the perceiver, which is called avarjana chitta. And some scholars believe that this text has been influenced by Theravada, because the moving of the mind starts with attention, which is called also Avajanachitta in Pali, which is evolving mind. Evolving mind comes from the bhavanga, literally meaning the uh, cause of the existence. Cause of existence is the continuity of the mind. Because we have continuity of the mind, we have cause of existence. And from this cause of existence, then evolves, due to attention, evolves active mind. And this active mind here is the aspect of evolving. The mind evolves from the activating mind. When there is activating mind, there is active mind. When there is active mind, there is aspect of the perceiver. Now, those who are familiar with Xuanzang, with the philosophy of Weife, know that the consciousness has three aspects, which are not accepted by Nagarjuna and by the tradition of Madhyamika. There is a self-witnessing aspect, Sva Samviti, which arises together with the Darshana Bhaga, the aspect of seeing, and the Nimitta Bhaga, the aspect of the picture being seen. So whenever the mind starts to move, because paying attention to an object, which can be a mental object, or which can be the object outside. So the mind is being activated. It is activated due to karma, because we have a karma. So mind is being activated, and this activated mind is then activating, evolving by this aspect of perceiver. When there is perceiver, then there is a perceived. So each mind has an aspect of self-witnessing, the aspect of the seer, which is a subject, and the aspect of the seen, the aspect of object. But these aspects, in these three subtle aspects of the mind, they still in the mind itself. And they arise because we have ignorance. And ignorance means we have not perfected our awareness. Our awareness is cause when not fully developed, and fully developed it's only in the case of the Buddha. According to this tradition, only Buddha has fully penetrating mind only. We have to become fully enlightened Buddhas to understand mind only. Even the Arahat does not understand the mind only. Only those who become, their mind becomes the Dharmakaya, Fashion, they understand the mind only. Because Fashion is suchness, and suchness belongs to the mind. So from this suchness of the mind, which is true aspect of the mind, non-moving aspect of the mind, which is mind like mirror, mind like space, which is able to reflect everything and accept everything, whatever is there, without differentiation. So this is the self-witnessing aspect of the mind. When there is self-witnessing aspect of the mind, which belongs to the moving mind, then automatically there appears the aspect of the perceiver and the perceived. The example is like the what you call it, the snail. Snail has two antennas, two sensors. When he touches the object, immediately these two sensors will come out. Similarly, when the image appears, these two sensors will come in the form of the darshana bhaga and the nimitta bhaga, which is in Lankavatara Sutra, the karmic consciousness and the khyati consciousness, the revealing consciousness. So the five aspects of the mind, which are called continuity of the mind, and continuity of the mind explains the manas, which is based on thinking, and thinking is individual. It has five names. The first name is called the active karmic consciousness. We can translate as activating consciousness. As soon as nimitta arises in the suchness of the mind, then it starts moving due to ignorance. But we don't see it because we don't have the awareness. So we don't see that this moving is apparent, but it is not real. So due to the power of our ignorance, the mind, which is of nature of non-moving, starts to move. So when the mind moves, it already moves because our consciousness has been activated by karma. And this is called the karmic consciousness. And karmic consciousness makes the mind move. But the mind has not the nature of moving. The mind has the nature of suchness. That which moves, moves due to images, objects, forms, which give rise to movement. But this movement in this tradition is something which is not real consciousness. It is something which is karmic consciousness. So we don't see that we have the idea that the images in the mirror are same like the mirror itself, but these images in the mirror, they come from the objects. The mirror itself has no image. So these images arise from the mind itself. From which mind? From the mind which has continuity, which is activated. So this is number one. We have the uh, karmic mind, which arises due to our power of our ignorance, based on the lack of awareness of the true mind, which does not move and can never move. The suchness never moves in reality. It moves only due to forms which appear from the suchness itself. So when the forms appear, the suchness of the mind is being perfumed, sichi, by the power of ignorance. And when this happens, The second mind is when there is no movement in the mind, when there is no karma in the mind, there is no seeing. Because there is karma in the mind, natural evolves from karmic mind, the uh, seeing mind. The seeing aspect of the seeing mind is the aspect of the evolving mind. From karma comes the evolving mind. Evolving mind is called Juan Xiang. Juan means avarjana, means turning towards the object. Turning towards the object is the action of seeing. Action of seeing is based on the action of being activated due to power of ignorance. So this aspect of seeing and aspect of seen appear in the mind spontaneously due to the aspect of karmic mind, and they appear in the mind itself. There is still not anything at this stage of most subtle mind. There is nothing which is outside, but we are not aware of it. In order to be aware of it, we have to attain, we will come to it later, at least the seventh stage of the bodhisattva ground, bodhisattva bhumi, in which we have penetrated that all the images are not real. Now we take these images as being real because we have not attained this high power of awareness, which our author of the treatise, Ashwagosha, it has achieved. He is believed to be on the 8th stage of the bodhisattva consciousness, bodhisattva awareness, where mind stops moving. Mind stops moving because it has penetrated these three subtle aspects of the mind. First, the mind is activated. When it is activated by karma, it evolves. When it evolves, it sees. And when it sees, there is that which is seen. So they appear still spontaneously at the same time because everything evolves in the mind, but we have no yet awareness to see that this mind which moves is an illusionary mind. We have to attain a very high stage of bodhisattva realization to know that the subject and the object idea appears only and exclusively because our awareness of non-duality has not yet reached the stage of understanding the non-moving mind. This non-moving mind sees all the images in the mind as ignorance. And so, because of that, it can change the images according to one's will. So these three subtle aspects, they are also manas. They bring to existence the continuity of the mind. They are illusions of the mind, which appear in the mind itself. There is not yet any outside world at this subtle stage of awareness. And they so to say, form the manas organ, the organ of thinking, which is our mentality. Hmm? And our mentality is the mind which sees and the mind which knows. And this mind which sees and mind which knows gives rise to form, rupa, akara. So, because of these three very subtle minds, we imagine the five objects of the senses. We start imagining these five objects of the senses to be reality. But this is all our imagination based on images in the mind. So, manas, the individualizing mind, has the form of visual object, of sound. And their nature is actually the nature of the mind. It is not separated from the mind. But our stage of awareness does not allow us to see that this idea of subject and object arises from the mind itself. From which mind? From the mind which is activated by karma. Being activated by karma, it produces itself a perceiver and the perceived. But here, at this stage of very subtle mind, which we have not enough awareness to see, there is not yet a real object, because still everything happens in the mind. Because there is no real object, there is not yet a real continuity. The real continuity comes when we start believing then the object is really there. And these are the three subtle aspects of the mind which we have explained. The karmic mind, the evolving mind, and the revealing mind. These three aspects of the mind, they then make the mind perceive something outside itself. Because there is a kyati vijnana, there is a revealing consciousness based on the subject. And when this revealing consciousness is not realized as being false, which presupposes a very high level of awareness, then our mind will become gross mind connected with the gochara, with the object, with the seen, with the heard, with the tasted, with the smelled, and with the touch. So it appears to be due to this aspect of the revealing aspect of the mind based on the evolving aspect of the mind, it appears to be there. It appears to be there as something different from the mind. So now we come to these six gross aspects. Please remember these three previous aspects. They are the subtle aspects. We have to be the highly realized bodhisattva on the seventh bhumi, to understand that these three aspects, they create the illusion of there being something different than the mind. At this stage, there is nothing but the mind. And this is the most subtle three kinds of consciousness. We have to have a very, very high level of awareness to be able to realize that how they work. So when we attain the achala mind, which is the non-moving mind, the eighth stage of the bodhisattva path, then we can, so to say, create objects according to our will. So we can create the images as we wish. Now, our mind has the illusion of there being an object different from the mind. So we come to the gross aspects of the consciousness. This gross aspect of the consciousness, they evolve from the most subtle to the most gross. And as we attain the higher and higher stage of realization, we then realize their non-reality again from the end to the beginning. So the first gross mind is called Zhi Xiang. Zhi, this Zhi Hui to Zhi. Zhi means wisdom. But what wisdom? Differentiating wisdom. According to Buddhism, the Theravada tradition or Sarvastivada tradition, the tradition explaining individual liberation based on the individual enlightenment rather than enlightenment to the nature of the mind. The in this tradition, we speak of the differentiating wisdom. But this differentiating wisdom in the non-dualistic tradition already belongs to the gross aspect of the mind. In the Theravada, in the Sarvastivada, the differentiating consciousness, the correct differentiating consciousness is the condition for becoming an arahat. But in this tradition, the correct differentiating consciousness is already a gross aspect of the mind. And this gross aspect of the mind already differentiates nama rupa. The nama, that is that which turns to the object, and rupa, that which is the object. Because the nama is breaking, the rupa is also breaking. Because the rupa is breaking, the nama is also breaking. But the arahat does not see that this differentiating mind is already a gross mind. In Theravada, when you read the Visuddhimagga, the consciousness, differentiating consciousness is a process. The beginning of this process is called sanya. Sanya means perception. So perception is compared to the child which sees a silver coin on the street and picks it up because he knows This is useful for the adults. Hmm? Then the differentiating consciousness is called vijnana. Here also vijnana, differentiating consciousness. But in here, differentiating consciousness is based on manas, on the organ of thinking. So the child brings the coin to the mother, and the mother sees it. It's a 1 rupee silver coin. Hmm? So she can buy that much rice, that much flour. She's very clear, but that is not the panya. This is not wisdom knowledge. So if she wants a wisdom knowledge, how much silver is in that coin and how much this coin is real value. In old times, they paid with the silver, and the silver was usually mixed with other metals. And so the mother wants to know which is the real value of this silver coin. She brings it uh, to the one who stamps the coins on behalf of the king, to make it a valid means of paying. And this one who stamps the coins, he takes the coin, bites it, scratches it with diamond and so on to see exactly the dust of this coin, how much silver is it in there, how much other metals, and then he determines the uh, real value, hmm, of the coin, and that is called panya. That is called wisdom. So in the tradition of the Abhidharma, the real wisdom is a differentiating wisdom. But here you can see this differentiating wisdom is already a gross aspect of awareness. The object is there, and the mind is there, which differentiates, on the base of the Vedana. Hmm? It differentiates on the base of Vedana what is pure, what is impure, but still it is the aspect of clinging to the pure or to the good, what it likes, and to rejecting the impure is still very weak. It is, so to say, consciousness informing on the base of Vedana, which differentiate Nama and Rupa. But with this differentiating consciousness, the process of thinking about an object as something separated from the mind starts. So it is called the differentiating consciousness. This differentiating consciousness is part also, as we know, the manas has 5 names. It is also part of the organ of thinking. And it starts the process of thinking. You start the process of thinking when, based on the 3 subtle aspects of the consciousness, you rely on thinking as something which takes real object. Sanskrit is a very wonderful language. This object, among others, is called alambana, that which you can hang your mind on. Hmm? And it's also called gochara. Tintye translate gochara. Go means a cow, and chara means a pasture. So when we not aware of the subtle aspect of the mind, so the mind has a pasture, like a cow has a pasture, where it can evolve and grasp the outer objects as something completely separate from the mind itself. And it starts this process of seeing objects as something separate from the mind itself, starts with this differentiating aspect of the mind. Now, this aspect of the mind here is called the name, but it is also Xiang, it is also Nimitta, the aspect of the mind, the first gross aspect of the mind, differentiating aspect of the mind. That means there is something which is there, and that something which is there is either pure or impure, and the pure starts the process of grasping, and the impure starts the process of rejection. And this is where Vedana, where feeling comes in, and feeling is the middle. But here it's already the middle of the gross mind, the mind which starts liking and disliking, which starts the process of thinking, which is based on liking and disliking. Without liking and disliking, the thinking does not continue. So it, so to say, introduces this aspect of differentiating mind, introduces the mind into the continuity. And the next aspect is the santati aspect, xiangxu, xiang. Xiangxu means continuity. Xiang means aspect, the aspect of continuity of the mind, where the Vedana, where the feeling is in the center of attention. So this continuity of the mind is the central function. In it is our feeling, which is different in regard to different objects according to our previous experience, which is stored in the subtle mind. So in this continuity aspect of the mind develops the inclination of the mind, which is still rudimentary in the aspect of differentiating, but here it becomes the main aspect. So, so it is based on discrimination between the happiness and suffering in regard to the objects, and mind such produces continuity. The continuity becomes the aspect of the mind which is the individualizing mind. So the individualizing mind here has the 5 names, the 5 aspects, and they together form the manas, the organ of thinking. This organ of thinking are these 5 aspects, 5 names, the aspect of karmic mind, the aspect of perceiver, the aspect of the perceived, the aspect of the differentiating mind, an aspect of the continuity of the mind. And this continuity of the mind does not cease as long as we, so to say, are thinking. But we are not aware of it. But when we attain the first stage of the bodhisattva, which is called the pure mind, then we become aware that this continuity of the mind is but the individualizing aspect of the mind, and we penetrate it. Therefore, we can realize the not individual realization, but the realization of the Buddha mind, of the Buddha nature, of the real mind, which has no individuality, as the Diamond Sutra is teaching. It never arose and it can never arise. That which is a self, that which is a being, that which is a soul, it never existed, never can arise. And this, in order to know this, we really have to realize the nature of the mind. And the nature, and that means the nature of the mind and the continuity of the mind, they're not the same. This continuity of the mind is due to thinking, and thinking is illusionary. And the object of thinking is also illusionary. So in order to realize it, we have to realize the Bodhisattva Bhumi. According to this tradition, even when we realize nirvana based on the correct differentiation, still we have not realized the illusionary nature of thinking. So if we want to practice the Bodhisattva path, we have to realize the illusion of the continuity of thinking. And that we only realize when we have penetrated the illusionary nature of all thoughts. Let us see if I can find the translation. I only see the Chinese text. I don't see it. My translation. So these manas, these 5 aspects of the manas, explain how impermanence arises from suchness. As soon as the mind starts moving, it creates an illusion of something. The something is really moving. So we do not realize that this alaya consciousness and this differentiating consciousness and the continuous consciousness is nothing but the non-enlightened aspect of alaya. We have learned that the alaya has enlightened aspect and it has non-enlightened aspect. So because of the non-enlightened aspect of the alaya, we do not see that when our mind is moving, it is illusion. It is illusion based on the continuity of consciousness. And this continuity of consciousness starts in the subtle mind, which does not leave yet the mind itself, and evolves due to differentiation and the differentiation into continuity. So here we are. Hmm? So we are nothing, we beings, and as a manas, organ of thinking in movement. But this movement is based on the karmic aspect of the mind, which becomes evolving aspect, a revealing aspect, a differentiating aspect, and continuity aspect. And this is what we are, beings having all each a different mind. We are alaya. Alaya explains how we dwell in the world. We become the manas. And manas means thought. Suliang. And the thought means, the thought is at the origin of arising and passing, which is samsara, and which is the impermanent mind. So, due to alaya, alaya has the aspect of jue, bodhi, we have learned, and the aspect of non-body, puchue, puchue xiang. Due to this aspect of non-body, then we identify with the movement of the mind as something real, and we lose the awareness of this enlightened aspect of the mind. And this happens in a gradual process, and it can happen like immediate intuition, but this immediate intuition is also not separated from the process. So, as you know, in Chinese tradition, you have two ways of understanding the meditation, the two jue, the sudden enlightenment, and the qian jue, the gradual enlightenment. This gradual enlightenment and the sudden enlightenment, they are not opposed to each other, because the nature of the mind never changes. And we can have a momentary intuition into the nature of the mind never changing, but we will lose it again because of our uh, deep identification with the continuity of the mind. This so this sudden enlightenment and the gradual enlightenment are actually two ways of investigating the mind, investigating the suchness, which is can be only find in the mind which has continuity. In the mind which has no continuity, the seeing, hearing, tasting is a mind which has no continuity. That in the mind which has no continuity, you cannot discover suchness. Only in the mind which has continuity, and that is the individual mind. That is a manas. And the manas, as we have learned, has 5 names. These 5 names, they form our individuality. Due to our individuality, we see, we hear, we smell, we touch, we think in a different way. So we don't see that this our continuity of being evolves from the mind itself. So we take it for granted that this seeing aspect of the mind and that which is perceiver aspect of the mind and the perceived are something not together. When we don't see that they are something which arises together, as soon as the mind moves, we, so to say, miss the awareness that all this is just production of the mind. So we rely on differentiating. When we rely on differentiating, we rely on Vedana, on sensation, which is based on perception. Without perception, there is no sensation. And when we rely on sensation, we rely on the individualizing mind. And the individualizing mind is uh, the non-enlightened aspect of the alaya. The enlightened aspect of the alaya, we can have short intuition, but as soon as we don't attain the bodhisattva realization, the realization of mind as suchness, we will always rely on the continuity of the mind as being something real, on the organ of thinking as being something real, which belongs to us, which separates us from others. So we are, so to say, in living in the illusion that, which can be very obstinate in our state, but which, even according to this tradition, even when we realize uh, nirvana as something opposite to samsara, this aspect of continuity of the mind as being real still exists. So the arahat, he does not need to understand that the nothing has own nature, that nothing arises, that everything arises from the mind, and that all that is composed does not really exist. Only the mind exists. The arahat does not need to know it, but in this tradition, this is the knowledge of bodhisattva. The knowledge of bodhisattva is the knowledge of the enlightened aspect of the mind, which is suchness. But in our case, this enlightened aspect of the mind is covered by ignorance. Where is it covered? In our Buddha nature, in our womb of Tathagata. So this ignorance covers the true nature of the mind and perfumes vasana, the pure. This is different from Xuanzang tradition. Ignorance can perfume the suchness, and suchness, as we shall see later, perfumes the ignorance. And this mutual perfumation of suchness through ignorance, ignorance through suchness is the beings. So in some beings, this true nature of the mind, the Jen, is completely covered by ignorance. In some, it is more clear. That's why, according to the Pali Canon, the Buddha, when he got enlightened, he contemplates all sentient beings as a lotuses deep sunk in the mud of existence. This comes in the Theravada Vinaya, and this is how we explain why. Because the beings, due to lack of awareness, do not see, they lose the understanding of the enlightened aspect of alaya consciousness, and they identify completely with the non-enlightened aspect of the consciousness. So we explain the enlightened aspect of the consciousness either step by step or sudden enlightenment, as Sutra of Huineng explains. Pen Lai Wui Wu. Originally there was nothing. So where can the dust settle? The dust, which is defilements, they have no place to settle. So all beings are in a true the Buddhas, but they don't see it because of the non-enlightened aspect of the consciousness, which becomes more and more obstinate when the ignorance perfumes the suchness, so the suchness becomes hidden. When the suchness perfumes ignorance, we believe that this continuity of the mind is not real. When we realize nirvana, it does not mean that we still don't believe that nothing has a true nature. Everything that moves has no true nature. We still not necessarily clear about it. But when we attain the stage of the bodhisattva, always clear. Whenever mind starts to move, it is an illusion. But the arahat, he gets some intuition of it, but still he can identify with his habits. And the enlightened bodhisattva, he can also still rely with on his habits, but he already considers this continuity of the mind as being like the second moon. So he attains the knowledge of non-duality. But let us leave it for now. The conclusion is, we can read it and explain it later. What does it mean? All dharmas are produced by mind, are born by illusionary thought. So, in other words, the true mind, Genru, the Gen of the Genru, is the base. And this base never moves. What moves is illusion. And illusion is the image. Illusion comes from the image as something different from the nature of the mind. But this image comes from the nature of the mind in this tradition. Mind cannot leave its nature. Therefore, the Dharma, we have learned, is one mind. So, because everything is one mind and the true nature of the mind you cannot abandon, so all differences is just one's mind differences. It's not, they don't exist in reality. Because in this tradition, same as Madhyamika in non-dualistic tradition, the differences, they have no real nature. They have no real nature, differences. They are of the nature of the mind, as we have learned. So when the differentiating mind disappears, the differences also as being something real, as having svabhava, having own nature, also disappear. Then we understand that all differences is the product of the mind, of which mind? Of the continuity of the mind, which is here the five names of the manas, which forms the continuity of the mind. So let us continue the next time. The Sandhi Nirmochana Sutra, the Tieshan meeting explained that the small Dharma cannot see the small Dharma. The small Dharma is this differentiating mind. Only the non-differentiating mind can see the beginning in the alaya, from which the impression of perceiver and the perceived arises. So let us finish here. We can dedicate the merit for the benefit of all sentient beings, and we meet next Saturday, not Sunday. Next Saturday is what date, Monica? Okay, on the 10th, we meet on the 10th of the 10th of August. After that, we won't meet because on the 16th, I will be flying to Nepal, and let us see what the conditions in Nepal are. I take the course and then I teach a course in Nepal, and according to the conditions, we can then think of time and date when we continue either Saturday or Sunday. But probably after I finish the course and do my course, then I can myself fix the time, not not be dependent on the daily program. And then also the Nepal is not Norway. Sometimes there is electricity, sometimes there is not. And the reception can suddenly stop, and it can this the interruption can sometimes last long, sometimes only few minutes. So we will see how the conditions are, and then we decide. So anyway, next week as usual, next week on the 10th, on the Saturday, we do 14:30 our time and 7:30 evening your time, and 8:30 the Taiwan or Hong Kong or China time. So let us dedicate the merit. 愿你之功德不计一切，我等一众生皆苦成佛道。May the merits of this practice today spread to all beings so that we attain the state of the perfect realization. Om Mitoba. So that much for today. See you next Saturday, and